Thank you. Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for being here. I know I'm the last thing between exploring Malaga, grabbing a beer, so I promise I'm going to keep it sort of fun, light, hopefully, and hopefully I can inspire you. If I don't, I owe you a beer tonight, right? But you can't all go to me because then I'm broke. So yeah. Talking about building emerging tech products, it's a little bit like my day-to-day work, especially going from hype to reality is something I see on a daily basis. I always need to think of this hype cycle, right? And my work is always to push the technologies beyond that curve to make it real, make people adopt technologies, find the value for it, find the usable. Making it usable, finding business value for it. So that really is the thing my work focuses on. And so to introduce myself a little bit, I'm a product manager within Microsoft. This is when I joined 4 years ago, all happy, young, you know, before corporate life. No, just kidding. Yeah, so I'm, oh, is it still working? No, it fell off. Oh, that happens. Or otherwise I can also use the mic. Oh, it's the last talk almost. Shall I use the...
It's working.
Oh yeah,
Is it working?
it fell, sorry. Okay, I'm gonna hold it. Sorry about that. No, it's okay. I can hold it otherwise. Otherwise maybe it's making a noise, so it's, yeah. So yeah, product management. So what do I manage, sort of, right? Implementing and customizing Microsoft emerging tech products. So I work on the consulting side where we have like a sea of developers, both back end and front end. And then I'm part of this sort of design team where we focus a lot on the start of building it, designing it. And so a lot of the products I work with aren't per se like Xbox or Office 365 because those are more standards, ready off-the-shelf products. I more work with the more complex products where our customers are like, okay, but how do you build it? Where do we start? We've never done conversational UI. We've never done mixed reality. Like, how does that work in the first place? And the fun thing about my job is that I work across countries, I work across industries, and so it never gets dull. There's always something new happening. And so that's a nice thing, but sometimes it's also a bit like this, you know, like shit hits the fan, and then it's just like, it's fine, like, I'm gonna be fine, like, stuff happens. Emerging tech is like this in general, right? The funny thing is that these fires aren't per se because of the designing and the development. Because what I've learned through sort of the process of building these products is that designing and developing these tech products isn't that different in the sense of the methodologies we use, the approaches we use, the mindsets we use. It's just going through a lot of iterations and failing fast. But the overall sort of approach that we're used to as designers and developers remains sort of the same. And where I really found that I was running into challenges was that communication sort of between business and front-end, back-end developers and data scientists. So a bit about what Alicia spoke about yesterday as well. And I want to talk about that today as well, but I'm going to go a little bit more into also the how. So how can we implement it and how can you bridge this gap between those two worlds, basically? And one of the things where I always start, and hence why I'm also now in product management, is because I'm always trying to find that innovation sweet spot between desirability, viability, and feasibility, right? And that's always where I'm trying to find the balance in order to bridge that gap and find one sort of middle ground where we can actually go from hype to reality and build a product. And this is a thing I used to have in university, and I always liked that sort of approach of the fuzzy front end, right? So that's what we call this part of the process where everything is super chaotic. A company comes up with the idea of, oh yeah, AI, you know, it's a hype, ChatGPT is a thing, we should go into it as well. So we want to build, I don't know, an agent, right, for customer service. Okay, yeah, but why? You know, what's the user value you're going to add? Should it really be like conversational AI, or shouldn't it just be like a website with a search bar? Like, why are we doing this in the first place? And that whole starting point is basically what we call the fuzzy front end, where my work focuses on as well, right? So going from that initial idea to building that first tangible version, which we call like a proof of concept or proof of value or prototype. And that's a bit where I live, right? And so I want to explore some examples or learnings I made through that cycle for two types of emerging tech that I'm working with a lot today. The first one being digital twins, also known as a version of industrial metaverse, it's sometimes called. So we had the whole metaverse hype, right? Now it's the whole AI hype. But digital twins is a thing that really stuck right now and that we're really seeing being adopted, adding value for businesses and for end users. So that's a nice thing. And then also generative AI, of course, we cannot really miss it. It's also a thing a lot of people are talking about today. So that's where I want to give some examples on as well, and some work in progress or learnings or things that came to mind while I've been doing these projects and building those products over the last couple of months. And then there's that one final thing I also want to talk about, which is unintended consequences. So when we build these things, right, what are the things that can happen that may have a negative effect as well? And how can we foresee those a little bit better and think about those a little bit better upfront so we can hopefully anticipate on them? So digital twins, right? I put the definition there just for people who may not be certain or may not be familiar with the term. So it's a dynamic virtual copy of a physical sort of asset or process or system that looks like and behaves identically to its real-world counterpart. And so the nice thing about it is that because you have this virtual version of the real world, you can use it to model behavior, simulate behavior, and make predictions. And so that's the use case and the value that we see most in digital twins. And so for Microsoft, the product I mostly work with is Azure Digital Twins, mostly focused also on these industrial use cases. So of course you can imagine that an industrial sort of production site with a lot of machines and production lines isn't the most agile sort of concept. Like if you want to try out a new process, these processes sometimes in production take days, if not even a week, right? So if you want to try out something new, there's a lot of time and resource investment that goes into it. And so it's not super agile and easy to try to innovate and try out new processes. And that's why we use digital twins a lot for this, so we can sort of mimic the production line and the industrial sort of flow of things and can basically simulate different scenarios to learn more about how we can improve the processes. And some of the general learnings that we saw until now is that digital twins involve a lot of data and insights, and that's nice, but what we often hear businesses say is, yeah, it's nice, we have like a lot of data and now we can finally show everything to everybody. And we're like, nah, maybe you should think a little bit more about who needs to see what, right? A manager in a factory probably wants to see something different, more high level, than somebody who's actually working with the machines and who's controlling them. So that's a thing that I think for us as front-end experienced designers, developers makes sense, but we still see a lot of business stakeholders not really thinking about that in the first place. Another thing is the data collections and connections and standardizing those. So what we see with digital twins as well is that they're mimicking such complex and large processes that there's a lot of different sort of structured data sets, which makes it always hard to sort of build it and then also scale it from there. So that's really a harsh requirement, which is a little bit more a back-end thing, but it's the one thing that we're mostly running into right now when building it. And then another learning, more general, is also towards that scalability, right? That we need to break down those silos and create more ecosystems of digital twins where you can really scale it and have like multiple factories in these simulation models to improve the prediction. So these are more technical learnings and a little bit more focused on the back end. But I want to dive a little bit deeper into that first one, because that first one really looks into data literacy and adoption as well. So one of the things that we've often heard people say is, here comes the voodoo data, right? So people don't really trust predictions. That could be because the company has been trying out new stuff with these digital twins. Maybe they prototyped it in the past and the data or the backend wasn't 100% correct. And so you really harm sort of and bias the trust of these people, right? That are supposed to sort of use it or that the business wants them to use it. Another thing that I always find really funny is watermelon KPIs. So they're like KPIs that look green on the outside, but actually they're red, which I thought like, oh yeah, that's also like a creative way of looking at it. But so this is also a thing that really shows us, oh yeah, okay, there's a lot of still challenges in the data literacy and the adoption that comes with digital twins, and I think emerging tech in general. And it again, I think, emphasizes the value that design research, but also everybody who's working on that front end piece, right? And the attention we give to why are we doing this and is this really usable? All that, again, proves to be really valuable for these emerging technologies. And so something that we find very simple but effective is the empathy map, which is a famous design thinking tool, where we basically put a persona in the middle and we go, okay, what do these people do, think, say, feel, right? And either we use it in a user research context or we use it in a workshop context with business stakeholders. And the quotes of the previous slides actually come from this exercise. So this is one of the exercises that we use quite often at the start of building these technologies, just to make everybody empathize with who are we building this for in the first place, and why do we think they need it, right? And what's their stance towards these technologies today. Another thing with digital twins are these sort of data dashboards that they often correlate or put next to them. And they're nice, right? Because you can simulate these scenarios. You can simulate scenarios, you can see the data, make it insightful, but there's an issue that I always have with this, because often customers then say, okay, this is nice, so can we then have the predictive insights, right? And that's always where, again, that gap comes in between development or tech mostly, right, and business. Because if you say predictive, what do you mean, right? And this is also about making it visual. So with sort of data analysis, there are different types of data analysis. Predictive is one of them, but probably you mean prescriptive, right? So what's the best course of action instead of only looking at what's likely to happen in the future? Or is it diagnostic? Maybe a company isn't at this level today and they're still at the descriptive state, right? So laying out the options like this has been very valuable for when we've been having these conversations with non-tech people to say, look, you talk about predictive, but is that really what you mean, or is it something else? Another thing is the insights piece, right? So a lot of non-technical people, mostly non-data scientists, talk about data insights. And the difficulty with this is that a business stakeholder says, okay, we want this insight. But then the data scientists go, okay, so what data points can you give us? I don't know. Like, what does the data set look like? So I tried summing it up in like a very simple sort of formula. I said like, okay, so a data point plus maybe another one. So a combination forms this data insight. So for example, a machine name, right? If we look at these industrial use cases, a name of a machine, so a filler machine, for example, and the time between errors of that machine could result in an insight of seeing what machines will require maintenance in the future if you put a predictive layer on it, right? This is super simplified, but just to give an example of how insights can differ from data points. And when I ran into this challenge and noticed that there was a communication sort of gap around this topic, I thought, okay, let's try to solve it, right? Let's get creative. I have a background in UX and design, so why don't we do like sort of like a memory game or card game? Because I have always all the people in the room, the data scientists, the business people, so maybe I can get them together and look at some visual stuff, right? So I said to the data scientist, I said, can you write down all the individual data points that you have or that you think are most valuable? Sometimes there are hundreds of data points, right? So in that case, I would say, okay, what are the most valuable 30 ones that you think would be the best ones? And I ask all the product managers, user researchers, business stakeholders to write down the user needs, almost like in a user story format, right? So as a da-da-da persona, I need da-da-da because da-da-da. And then I said, okay, let's then lay them out on the table and match them, right? And on top of that, let's also look at the types of data analysis, so predictive, diagnostic, descriptive, and maybe adding extra filters or focus areas. So for example, seasons, like weather seasons, operating status in the case of machines, products, and so those kind of things, putting it out on a table like that, right? Identify the data points that match with the insights, and then what are the data points and the insights that remain, right? And is there a way to solve those? Is there a way to still make use of those data points that the data scientists find useful, and can it really add value for users? And the other way around, if there are specific user needs, is there a way to still create those insights through data points, or are we missing those today? And do we need to add sensors in the overall production line? So that's a bit the thinking that we then do with this exercise, and it's sort of a way to show, okay, sometimes by these simple card games, you can bring two worlds together, and it makes it a lot easier for people to communicate with each other. Oh yeah, predictive, right? So we put these cards over it as well. Then for generative AI. So generative AI, I think a lot of people have heard about it, but putting the definition there, right? It's a form of AI in which models are trained to generate sort of new, original content based on natural language, right? So one thing that I've been getting a lot, and I always need to laugh when I see this quote, I had like, since this whole thing, generative AI started and ChatGPT was launched, like all my customers came to me and they were like, okay, so Josephine, we want generative AI and we want a chatbot. And I was like, no. Because, and this is like the one thing I've heard most often, and that I really was like, okay, no, generative AI can be so much more. And so I wanted to call out that generative AI are not only chatbots, and that's the great thing about generative AI. We're now, with our design team, creating a sort of library of design patterns as well, because I think there's still a lot of redefining to do around how we can use generative AI and how it can add value for different types of users. One of the things we've seen is this sort of search experience by simply just adding a sort of smart result widget in the top where we say, okay, these are the normal results with your search page. And there's like this extra sort of smart, intelligent result that we've used or that we generated through generative AI. And even though this doesn't look like an ideal solution, I know it's work in progress, but still it's helping a lot of our customers today to A/B test basically these generative AI sort of answers and to see, okay, is it really better than the answers we're getting generated today? How does it work? Like, how is it formatted? And so simple things like this are being found really useful for people we're building this for. So it's also showing like starting in small chunks, right? And how sort of going from hype to reality, you can really build these emerging technologies. Another thing that we're realizing more and more is that generative AI is really transforming search experiences in that case as well. If we look at that search use case, going from keyword to multi-term search, right? So today a lot of search experiences are mostly focused on keywords. And so we're seeing more and more that generative AI can really sort of elaborate on that, right? And can enable users to search through more natural language without immediately turning it into a chatbot experience. And so I've listed here a bit the difference between search queries and keywords, right? And our team is still very much trying to think about, okay, how can we prompt users in a better way to search with multiple words instead of keywords only without turning it into sort of a chatbot flow. And that's a thing that we're now working on a lot, and we don't have it fully answered yet. So it's just, I wanted to be open in, these are things that we are now coming across, and that are quite interesting because we don't have them completely figured out yet, which is okay with emerging tech because it's emerging, right? It happens. It's the chaos that comes with it. But for example, this is also a thing that we see more often where you have this Samsung experience, and it could also only be like the suggestions in the search beams, right? That sort of are a little bit more elaborated with generative AI. So how to do that is, again, to think a little bit more about maybe using service blueprints more, right? It's a tool most of us maybe know, but it's basically mapping out the whole journey, the user journey, and then also below that, sort of mapping swimming lanes with, okay, what then happens in the front stage, how does the back end work, and how does it all intertwine, and what are those touch points where generative AI could sort of, elaborate on that experience and make it more valuable. So this is a tool we use a lot. It's a tool we all know. So again, the methodology and the mindset for emerging tech and building emerging tech isn't that different. It's just, again, using these tools and applying them and mapping it out, mapping out the options, making it visual. Everybody understands visuals mostly, so you don't get that language barrier. I just wanted to point this out. So this is the Human AI Experience Toolkit that Microsoft created as well. They've also been working on sort of trying to identify these design patterns for AI experiences. So just to show you that a lot of people are working on it, it's still work in progress, but it's also open source. So if you're interested in it, you can access that as well. And then one other thing I wanted to call out around generative AI, which we're seeing, is that generative AI can really be the voice of your brand, right? So I got this picture as well from more like a copywriter institute. But what I find really interesting is that generative AI is creating content, right? And especially when it creates text or when it's a voice, there's always a tone of voice or some type of brand identity incorporated in that you as an organization should be aware of, right? Because generative AI in that case can literally be the voice of your brand. And so it's important that you know the voice, right? It's consistent, you like the voice, there's a character in it, and you trust the voice, right? In some instances, that's also really a thing. So that's something we're seeing more and more as well, that generative AI is also very much close to brand identity and positioning. And last year, here at the conference, I actually did a workshop as well on a toolkit I created around conversational user experiences. And there's still a lot of exercises with tone of voice that we use quite often in order to get that right. Canvases that are in it, so this is also open source, the CUX toolkit, where we ask companies to think about, your brand values, your mission and vision statement, what's your brand identity, and how is generative AI, the content you're creating, in this case it was a bot, right? But going beyond the bot, like what is the language, what is the tone of voice, what are traits that you want to avoid, what are traits that you like, right? To make sure that the content that's created is in line still with the brand identity. Then the final thing I wanted to call out are the unintended consequences. So for every action there's a reaction, right? What Newton says. And in this case, when building emerging tech products, everything we do, including the technologies, right, can bring consequences. Some positive, but sometimes also negative. And so one of the methodologies that our research teams use a lot within the product teams are the future cone, which is basically this ideation tool where you try to think about, okay, this is the product we have right now. What are the possible futures? What are the preferred futures, right? So how do we prefer people to use this product? What could happen when people use this product positively? What is probably going to happen? And then, what is plausible, right? And then there's also this sort of joker sort of card where it's like, okay, and what's the worst thing that can happen, right? A wild card. And this ideation tool can help you a little bit by already thinking about what could be the consequences, and sometimes not per se, prevent them maybe, right, by thinking or refining, redesigning features, but also by anticipating a little bit more on them. And then also Judgment Call is a card game that we also have open source, created by Microsoft, which is more like a role-playing game, where basically you're gonna review a product, which is your product then, or service, and where everybody takes a role. So there's, for example, a child in there, there's an elderly person in there, there's a hacker in there, so somebody with already like very negative intentions. And you're gonna rate the product of like, okay, how easy can I do certain things with it? And how does it refer to ethical, sort of AI ethical principles that were created? So this is also a fun card game. It's a little bit out of the box because it's role-playing, but that also, I think, makes it fun and and cool to do. So those are two things I wanted to call out when thinking about unintended consequences as well. And so the key takeaways that I want you to take with you before you drink a beer tonight is when envisioning emerging tech, it's important to bridge that gap, right? So as Alicia said yesterday as well, it's not like the problems I'm seeing aren't per se in designing and developing the tech. It's more around how do we start and initiate the process, and how do we get the requirements in to build it and make it sort of successful as well. And laying out all the options, right? So make it visual and tangible to ensure collaboration and to ensure that everybody is involved in the conversation of gathering those requirements, whether it's a toolkit, whether it's drawing wireframes, whether it's like those card decks, whether it's a service blueprint, just drawing out a journey. Like all of it is good as long as it's visual. And then final thing is identify potential unintended consequences early on. Emerging tech is like the dog in the room filled with fire, right? You don't really know where it can go. It's fine, but like stuff can happen. So try to already think about it up front. And you can think about positive, right? It can be positive, but also negative. So it's both ends, but it's just good to think about it already early on. And with that, I want to thank you. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.